right, guys, the Cooper Chronicles, Volume 7. We are back. Planet X Filmworks. Give us a like, sub, and share. You can go ahead and click the membership button down by the join. And been a minute, but we had some requests to get the Cooper content back on the channel, so that's what we're doing. Back here with the interview series. First up, we got Finding DB Cooper by Martin Andrade. Martin Andrade Sr. Definitely pick this up. The link is below in the description. As well as Marty's WordPress. And without further ado, let's get this interview going. Legend in the Cooper space, Marty Andrade. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Just discussing off air with Marty. Just finished the book recently. Really good job. Even a couple suspects in your major and minor list that I hadn't even heard of myself, because I'm sure we'll get into it. There's quite a few of them in the Cooper world. Couple hundred, I would assume. Some better than others.
Yeah.
Shout out to Nikki B. Looks like he's there in the chat. Definitely going to bring you up soon, Nikki, to do some co-hosting on the Chronicles with me. So what really struck out, let's just get right into the meat and potatoes, Marty, about your research and why I wanted to read your book. For one, your name comes up. Schaefer, Beeson, everyone I've ever asked says get Marty Andrade on. So, of course, that had to be done. That's number one. But it's your World War II kind of statistics, survivability rates of the ejected pilots. That's kind of what I was looking for here. And it's I guess it's kind of your argument that it seems more likely than not that if Cooper pulled, he would most likely would have survived. You're the expert on that, so I'll let you explain it better than me.
So this goes back a long time in the vortex. A lot of people said the jump wasn't survivable. That was a story for a long time. And the simplest way to figure out how likely or unlikely something is to count things. So eventually I was able to find basically a complete database of every bailout for Allied and Axis powers in Denmark during World War II. These are not ejections. These are bailouts, people jumping from aircraft, not being ejected out by a seat. And what I found was it was exceptionally difficult to find anyone that had no pulled, which was the theory at the time. We're going back to 2014, 15, 16 with this data, or with this theory. And I went back recently and looked at it because I found, there were reports of people of bodies found of RAF and American airmen that had been found with an unopened parachute on the ground. And I put those as like probable no pulls in my data set. Went back and looked at it, and every single one of those soldiers perished in an aircraft that was either on fire or exploded. None of them were in an aircraft that was relatively stable. Even a bad bailout situation, you can get out of the aircraft, right? They were not in they were in an unsurvivable situation. So the end result was, after a couple of years work on this, I didn't find a single example of an airman who did not pull the ripcord. Every single one of them did, who was awake, conscious, and jumped from an aircraft at altitude that had enough altitude to open up the parachute. And that was important because these guys didn't get training. These guys didn't go through jump school. They just sat down in the classroom for like 10 minutes perhaps and were told, do this, clear the parachute. If you're up high, you do this. It was not training that as such. It was just information.
Sure, absolutely. Just kind of informational walkthrough. And yeah, that was my understanding from what you wrote too, was like you really didn't find any no pulls, which is, kind of astounding,
No, and in skydiving, anecdotally, there were lots of examples of it. But what are skydivers doing? Skydivers are free falling. Mm-hmm. These airmen were not looking for a good time. They were trying to get out of an aircraft that was on fire, and they were trying to get to the ground safely. And there's no free falling. There's no stunts. There's none of that. They're going to pull that ripcord as soon as it's safe, and they're going to save their lives. And that's what I found, is that the parachute was an extraordinarily effective life-saving device in the most ridiculous situations that you could imagine. I mean, there were examples from World War II of guys that had 20 millimeter cannon shells sticking out of their thigh because they got hit and they were able to get out of their aircraft and pull the ripcord. Guys that put on their parachute in free fall. There were guys that got blown out of aircraft and woke up and then pulled their ripcord. Just whatever you wanted, it was there.
Amazing. Yeah, and I really love that kind of juxtaposition you have because, early on, the kind of mainstream narrative with Cooper is that, the little bit of drizzle of rain, how freezing cold it is, which we know is not the case on the ground. But they kind of tried to put all these hurdles in front of Cooper's, Norjack jump that was like, oh, it was nighttime. It was so dangerous. And then it's really a walk in the park compared to these World War II live action bailouts. You know what I mean?
No, I would say that Cooper's jump was a lot safer than the stuff that I looked at.
100%.
The plane was not on fire. The plane was not going down. The plane was not exploding. He was not getting shot at. It was from the standpoint of what I was looking at, it was ideal. Most importantly, the RAF flew almost exclusively at night. So about half the data are guys jumping at night in any weather conditions. And again, it's Denmark, so it's cold and miserable and windy and awful, just like it is in Minnesota right now.
Sure. Yeah. And so, I mean, there is probably a lot of comparison to, I guess, how bad they make Cooper's jump look as opposed to what those pilots or airmen were kind of actually dealing with in those Denmark weather conditions. So I just found the whole thing fascinating. I know your book came out a few years back, but I think if anybody's, just getting into the vortex now or 2016, that they should still go take a look and pick it up and kind of see what you said. I know you have some of the stuff on your website as well. So they should go ahead and check that out. Yeah. I believe the link is below in the description, guys. So, that was kind of my favorite piece of what your angle was. I thought you did a really good job of breaking that down. I suppose we could, you went into Tina Bar in there. We could talk some Tina Bar unless you prefer to talk the drop zone first, and we can kind of work our way into Tina Bar.
It's up to you. I've been in the vortex so long, it doesn't matter what order the pain is.
Sure. I feel you, man. I feel you. I know how it is. I kind of bounce in and out, but I see how it goes. It really grinds my gears on some of this scientific stuff. Let's just do the drop zone because I thought you did a pretty good job of explaining that in the book. I kind of go back and forth on it. I suppose we all go back and forth on it in the vortex to some degree, but it doesn't really make sense that it's kind of where the FBI thought that it was, because I would have expected him to find something. Cooper had enough things with him that I imagine, whether it's part of the chute, the other bags he was carrying, I would imagine something would be found. So let's just get into the drop zone and you kind of give us your take on it.
Sure. I'm actually relatively orthodox now. After spending, God, this is the 11th year I've spent in this nightmare. You entertain ideas like, okay, did he jump over Portland? Did he jump over the Columbia? Did he jump farther north? Did he jump into Lake Merwin? Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is, now that we have a better understanding of the map, that yellow map that pops up that the FBI has, it is a FAA sectional map that has been laminated. That's where it gets the yellow color from. And the bottom line is that I think that Cooper jumped, at or before 8:13 p.m. The farthest south he could have been was Battleground. Farthest north he could have been would be perhaps half a mile south of Lake Merwin Dam. And they did not really search that area, not in the way that you understand it. You hear about the soldiers going, arm in arm, 6 feet apart. They didn't search the area where he probably jumped like that. They had the area wrong. I've seen maps where they're basically too far east, and they're searching also south of Lake Merwin, which is also wrong. So, no, they didn't actually search where we think, even though he jumped really close to where they think he did.
Sure. Yeah, and that's super interesting, too. I mean, I know there's the weather conditions, so ultimately they kind of call it off. Cooper does have a pretty good head start when he hits the ground, so kind of gives, good reasoning for how he's able to get out of there. I'm thinking it's around Battleground. I always like the Amboy chute story that's up there in the kind of landfill, whatever it is. I always thought that was interesting, but seems to be a missed opportunity on the drop zone there for sure.
It was a missed opportunity, and I think more importantly, especially with the Amboy parachute, is that they ignored a lot of parachutes. They ignored parachute there's one example in the FBI files where there was a 24-foot parachute found. Later turns out that he jumped with a 24-foot parachute, and they ignored it because it was too small. They didn't have a good handle on what the parachute was because there was a big confusion about that. So I think the entire ground search was just mishandled, and they got wrong from the beginning in every aspect.
Yeah, and so what we're often told are these are well-hunted areas, well-explored areas. I know there's the fiberglass sheet, and then that other piece from the possibly from the stairs, which is supposed to be from the same model plane. I mean, what do you make of that? Or, wouldn't we expect like a hunter to come up with something? I mean, I know we're talking about a vast area here, so it's easy to generalize this.
Well, it is, and I don't believe. The placard find, it turns out those were on the outside of the aircraft. They could be from any aircraft that flew for 727 flew from 1962, 63 until basically 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That fiberglass find was also, I think, erroneous. I don't think that was from the aircraft. I know there's supposedly a part number to it, and none of that ever made sense to me. I'd love to see it, but it's not available. They just didn't look at it. So there's just no information from that perspective as to help us physically put the plane somewhere at a certain time.
Yeah, sure. I used to be pretty strong on the placard until I started hearing what you just said there, which is like this is basically a corridor that's almost nonstop through that period. So I mean, I guess people's argument is, well, Cooper obviously had the stairs down, so the wind, whatever, or he knocks it off himself or whatever. So I guess that's kind of where people go with it. Let's see.
Yeah, the other problem is that placard's from the outside of the aircraft, and
Sure.
They would come up that and we also have pictures of the aircraft N467 US, and those stickers are still on it after the hijacking. So they didn't come from that aircraft.
Yeah, I think that's what Nikki B just said. Placard has been debunked. The fiberglass skirt, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I think you guys are.
Well, I think that skirt, I think the skirt on 305 was actually some kind of canvas. There's video. It makes it look like it's canvas. It may not be. It might be fiberglass, which would be really thin. But no part of that find makes sense to me, and I've had to think about it now for a couple of years, and I'd still would want. There's just not enough information.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with that. So, I mean, if anybody else has anything else on the drop zone for Marty here, feel free to throw it in the chat, guys. And until then, we'll keep moving on. So, I really like how you covered the Tina bar in Finding DB Cooper, and again, it's one of those things that ping pongs back in the vortex. People have kind of dug in and gone super hard on both ends. It's very confusing because of the condition that the bills are found in. But I guess just summarize a little bit, and then we'll get into what you might think are possibilities for how it shows up at that location.
So I tend to be relatively orthodox in my thinking here, in that you have a sandbar essentially right next to a river, and you would think river is the obvious transport. The problem is every single piece of evidence that we as a vortex have uncovered, like every piece of evidence that Tom has produced, goes completely against it. The diatoms are the wrong time of year. There's no silt on the bills. The bills were exposed for years. I mean, probably the entire time, the entire 9 years. But the sand was probably a recent arrival at the sandbar. That sand was probably reworked and remixed in that year. That was what Leonard Palmer, who was an expert in that particular field, he was a geologist. That's what he said, is that sand there's new garbage in the sand. That's in his report. Like, there's new garbage. There's cans. There's nails. There's no rust on them. This stuff is all new. This sand has been reworked by wave action. It's not old. So every single thing goes against natural arrival. If your theory is Cooper lost the money in the jump, or he went into the Columbia for some reason and it arrived there within a year, it just doesn't make sense. So
right.
In the end, orthodoxy is wrong, which it allows for a lot of really crazy theories, because now all of a sudden you're talking about people planting the money, or people murdering Cooper and then fishing for some reason on Cinnabar. Like it
Yeah.
goes into a tornado really fast.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I know when, when way back when Gray did Skyjack, Kay kind of tested the, tributary theory of it coming down, the Washuga theory. And it's just like, from what I can see, all these kind of theories that people have kind of come up with, like, have been tested. And as you said, none of it really adds up to a good explanation for how it arrives there.
So I was working on natural arrival just like within the last 2 years. And I thought, okay, you look at the watersheds and you look at where the watersheds drain into the Columbia. And I thought, well, you know what? There is a vector here. There's the Burnt Bridge Creek trajectory. Burnt Bridge Creek is a watershed that goes all the way up to Battleground. I was sitting there following where the water would have gone. There's culverts, there's little streams. There was a major flood at Burnt Bridge Creek in, I think, 73. And I spent probably an hour or two every day for a few weeks working on this theory. Because, okay, it goes out here. There's the Vancouver Lake. Does it make sense? Can it get there? And then after I work on this for almost a month, Tom Kay comes out after CooperCon in, I think, 2022 and says, hey, there's no silt. There's no flooding. I mean, there'd be silt and floodwaters. It's not going to work. And I just had wasted my time. And that's the story of Cinnabar. Every theory that you have and you work on and you try to find evidence for it and you try to make it work ends up being wrong. And it just remains an intractable mystery. And my thoughts are, you know what? If you walk on a beach and you find a piece of garbage, are you going to be able to figure out where that garbage came from if it's on a river? Good luck.
Right. Yeah. So especially where, like the Fazios seemingly are kind of working the land nearby too. So it's of course, this was like a party, barbecue area, commonly well-traveled area at the time or shortly before the time, rather. So yeah, I don't know. I'm totally confused by it. I think the evidence just seemingly goes against the natural arrival. As you're saying, I know people have gone over the dredging nonstop, but it just like, it getting stuck on a boat and kind of flicked up there onto the sand, that never really made sense to me either. So it's like, I think we've all thought of all types of things here. I know, some people are super against like Ulysses' theory that, it's buried and then he comes back during or before the flood and kind of digs it up. I mean, I think there could be something to that, but it's just like, I also don't see if you put it there yourself and then you're digging it up, or you're going to leave that 5,800 there because that's kind of leaving open the door to, kind of making a mistake and maybe tracking back to you or whatever, So
yeah, no, that doesn't make sense either, unfortunately. So like I said, you can come up with incredible grand theories and someone's always going to poke a hole in it because parts of the theory are just not going to make sense.
100%. Looks like Nikki jumped in here with the trucking sand from the DZ to T-bar, but still has its challenges. Yeah, I haven't even heard of that one. That's definitely interesting.
Yeah, well, you only have certain ways. You have mechanical intervention, you have natural arrival, you have human intervention, and then you have like the really crazy stuff, which would be animal intervention.
Sure.
And you look at each, none of them make sense. And it probably has to be a compound event. But every time you have an intervention, like a mechanical intervention, human intervention, animal, every intervention means that your theory is probably by a factor of 100 less probable. So you go from, 1,000,000 to 1 to 1,000,000,000,000 and 1 very quickly if you add in a couple of mechanical interventions. So I think it's an intractable problem. I don't think it can be solved.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're probably right on that, unless Tom comes up with something a little bit closer with the science, or we get some sort of break that starts to explain something here.
Yeah, we would need that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting though. Like what, the other thing, like about like, I'm all for him losing the money in the jump because that's fine, but then I don't still see how just the 58 shows up there randomly. You know what I'm saying? Wouldn't we get bigger blocks of cash there? Or
well, it should be in a bag, right?
That's what I was going.
It's supposed to be in a bag wrapped up in paracord. Yeah. He had, I think, 100 some feet of paracord to wrap this with, so it should be all together.
Yeah, that's I'm totally with you on that.
It's
I'm like,
one brick shows up, one brick of money shows up, 9 years later, and it was worth it. Like it is evidence that made the case more difficult to understand.
yeah, and of course the shards. It's interesting. They want to say that there's all these shards in the sand. Wasn't there this rumor that some other kids were fishing and they supposedly found like all these chips of bills? I don't know if it was verified.
They said that there was corners found a week before along the tide line, high tide mark, and I don't think that's ever been confirmed. Right. And even if there's no serial numbers, right? There's no way to check that $20 versus what was found.
Right.
And people had 20s, like people had money on them, people had cash on them all the time back then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, it's one of those. Tina Bar is almost as interesting as the whole heist itself. You know what I mean? Just spinning your wheels on it, because it's we love it and hate it at the same time. It's so interesting, but like you said, every answer raises a new question, especially with Tom's research.
Well, and Tom has done a great job. But if you go back to the original investigation, which involved Leonard Palmer, who was a widely recognized geologist at the time who worked in Portland, and you had a hydrologist who worked on that river for the Army Corps of Engineers, who is still alive, and I tried to talk to him, and he hung up on me. And actually, I can't even call his office anymore; it just doesn't go through. So he changed the number, I guess. Right. You have people with PhDs who were working in the area at the time, who were professionals, who looked at it for months, and you read the FBI files, and they got about as far as we did. They just couldn't explain it. They came up with the Washougal washdown theory. Then the hydrologist was like, well, that doesn't make sense. It has to be this. And it's fascinating to see, especially when you have like Tom Kay comes in, 30, 40 years later to look at what Palmer did. And he says, well, Palmer got this wrong. Leonard Palmer, the expert in the field, got it wrong. Well, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Here's Nikki here. I think the shards were just a product of bad excavation. That could certainly be.
Oh, for sure. They were. There's video of them digging the beach, and they're just taking a shovel like they're trying to do landscaping in their front yard. So that would contaminate the layers pretty badly, and you see that. And there's the way they did it with the shards, everything else, totally contaminated and ruined the site. Yep. And if you see if Leonard Palmer gets on there, and I talk about him a lot because I've researched him a lot now.
Sure.
He had to move. So he went down the beach and he had the Fazios remove just like 4 or 5 feet of soil so he could get down and see the layers. Mm-hmm. And he had to move it really far away from where the FBI had been working because they ruined it. They ruined the beach.
Sure.
So the only way to get an uncontaminated look at the layers was to get farther away from the site. So absolutely, they really muffed that up.
Yeah, it wasn't like a archaeological expedition, guys, where you see them with the little tiny brushes going centimeter by centimeter. It wasn't quite so granular as we would all like. Here's Fire Pixie. If he's good enough to pull this off and he's already thrown off the searchers, could he not go back to Tina Bar and stash a little cash, throw it off even more? Of course, we hear that one a lot, Marty.
So I don't mind. Honestly, I don't mind that theory because people say, like, why would Cooper bury the money? It doesn't make sense. He'd gotten away with it or whatever. And the thing is, like, if he did put the money in there, which I'm not saying is even likely, everyone says, well, he must have died. So people are like, why would he throw the money away? To make it look like he died, which is what everyone says. And you get someone who is on it and say, well, it doesn't make sense that he would bury the money. He must have died. And then you say, well, maybe he buried the money to make it look like he died. Like, well, no, that's ridiculous. He wouldn't do that. There's a contradiction in your thinking there. And 100%. You need to take a look at it.
Yeah, a guy who wouldn't do that, who brought either fake, real bomb on the plane, did the first heist of its kind that had never been solved even today. It's like people taking, from a skill set, what they like and leave what they don't. You know what I mean? So we can't put anything past the guy.
No, and the other thing is that it was found at Tina Bar, and people don't say Tena. You hear that occasionally. I have. No one said Tena. No one said Tena until that was discovered a few years, like in 2017 or something like that. Everyone called it Tina Bar. The sign said Tina Bar. The sign back then said Tina Bar. I've seen pictures of it. He may have, because he tried to tip these girls. He tried to tip Tina. He tried to tip Flo. He tried to tip Alice. He may have just said, like, look, just, you know what? I'm sorry about what happened to the girls. I'm just going to throw the money away. We'll do it at Tina Bar, because he's probably from the area. So he may have known about, I think he was from Portland, or at least relatively close to that area. So he may have known about it. Sure. That's as far as I've come up with. And that is one of my first posts. We've been going back 13 years or whatever, 11 years. Was that could have been the case. And I went off of it, and now I'm stuck. I'm kind of going back toward it.
Yeah. So, and it's
I want to. Like I said, I'd want a real answer, but
Sure. Absolutely. So the original explorer was Tenna, right? And you're saying that the actual pronunciation is Tenna for the T-E-N-A.
I think it's actually Tina. I'd have to know the language of origin for the surname for this person we're talking about from the 1880s, who first plotted that land out for themselves. I think it is. I would guess if it's an English gentleman, it's Tina. If it's a German gentleman, it's Tenna. If it's Spanish, it's Tana or Tana or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the real. I don't, unless somebody knows one of them or one of his descendants. We can't be sure.
Yeah, the genius theory I came up with was, and I thought it was real groundbreaking stuff, was that he had given the 58 to an accomplice who got cold feet, and then had went and buried it. And then I read Skyjack and saw that Tom Kay said that like about 20 years before I had thought of it. So that's as far as I got. Yeah. So it's tough to come up with an original theory in the Vortex, guys. I'll tell you that much for what little time I've spent here. But anything else on Drop Zone or Tina Bar find for Marty in the chat, guys? Otherwise, we'll if you want to talk a little bit Gunther, maybe just summarize some Gunther and Dan LeClaire, Marty, for my audience. Tough to do.
I spent 10 years on it, and I spent a lot of time believing that it was the likely, at least partially, the true story of DB Cooper. Now I don't know. I think Gunther was actually hoaxed.
Sure.
But let me try to summarize it very quickly. Max Gunther, he was a professional writer, lived in Connecticut. He wrote a lot of topics. He wrote for True Magazine, Playboy Magazine. He wrote a bestseller called The Zurich Axioms, which is about investing. He wrote a lot about money. He was kind of obsessed with it. He wrote a book about witchcraft and money, picking stocks. He was a working writer, so he was trying to make his living writing, and he was contacted. He was definitely contacted in 1982, I believe, by someone who was claiming to have been Dan Cooper's or DB Cooper's girlfriend, and he heard the story. He had 6 pages of notes, which we now basically have, and he threw together a novel. And the novel is a complicated document of original research, of the information he was told by the woman called herself Clara, and there's also things that he cut and pasted from former articles that he wrote that he just threw in there to fill in pages to get a book out of it. He was fascinated by the case, but I think the reaction to his book was so negative that he didn't do many interviews, or maybe he didn't do any interviews, none that I've been able to find. And the end result is there were a few really interesting things in the book, things that directly relate to information that has come out recently from Tom Kay's research that say, well, this might be true. But like I said, unfortunately, I think that there is something else going on. I think he was hoaxed. But sure. Like I said, there's a lot going on. That's about half the book. Half of my book was spent on this. So I don't know where you'd want to go with it, but it's I could talk for hours on it if you let me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will full disclosure for my audience. I haven't read Gunther. I didn't realize that you were going to be using some of that stuff in your stuff. But again, I've listened to many episodes of The Vortex with Schaefer, so I've kind of always heard about Gunther from these secondary sources. So I have some grasp of the material. I guess where I would go with it is just the fact that, at least at the time, you thought that the tie particles could line up with what Dan LeClaire's supposed profession was.
Right, which was as a salesman in the industrial chemicals industry. More importantly, a salesman that traveled a lot, because I think these particles come from all over. They come from, we haven't found one industrial site that explains all the particles that were found. You need multiple different sites, and unless we find like a miracle one. But it seems like there's just like this guy wore this tie all the time. Whoever owned the tie wore it all the time in industrial settings and got a lot of crap on it. There's just an unbelievable amount of dangerous chemicals on it. So, which is interesting in and of itself. But so you had a salesman and a manager in industrial chemicals. You also have a link to the Elsinore ghost. The Elsinore ghost was an individual who just appears in Elsinore, which is near Los Angeles. It is a paracenter, a jump center, and he's asking Lyle Cameron, who ran that center, like, can you jump out of an aircraft? Can you jump out of a jet? What would you do? How would you handle that? Can it be done? And we didn't know about that. We didn't know about that until the FBI files were released in 2016 or so. When that was incredible. Because I thought, when I read the book first, before we had that information, I thought this didn't happen. This is something that Gunther made up, or is just part of a fake narrative, and it turned out to be possibly real. But again, I think there's a likelier explanation for that, and it was just a huge coincidence in the book and what we actually know about what happened at Elsinore.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of the Elsinore story. I know Nikki B has sent me some of those documents, and I've read through it. That was super interesting, and I like your point there that the tie seemingly accumulated different particles at different sites, which I think is significant. Because as you said, there's no kind of just direct, hey, this plant worked on every single one of these, and here's the perfect list for the tie. At this time, it just kind of doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, you have sand from RMI. You have sheared pure titanium with stainless steel, which would come from a machine shop. You have red phosphors, which come from CRT TVs, cathode ray tube televisions. That doesn't make sense. That could be, that could be a garbage pit. It could be someone in actual TV manufacturing. It could be someone in chemical sales. You have uranium now. And you have, what the heck are they called? Tectons? Something else that Tom recently found that now linked to something else that, and geographically limit Cooper to the Rocky Mountain area, Rocky Mountains or west, I believe. So yeah, there's nothing, there's no one place. There's no one miraculous site where you're going to find all this crap. It has to be from multiple different places. And there's a possibility of contamination too. You don't know. So I love the tie stuff. I love the tie particles, but realistically, we will be lucky if we find one or two locations that explain some of the particles.
Yeah, so I went to CooperCon 2022, and I thought we were close when we were doing the whole REM crew thing, and then obviously Tom has these kind of higher resolution scans that he does each year, as the equipment upgrades, and then seemingly gets more particle and more data. So yeah, I'm far from a scientist. I kind of just follow it from a layman's perspective, like the rest of us do. But yeah, it's absolutely super interesting. The whole stubs, and it's kind of leans us one way. A lot of us were thinking REM crew, and now there's kind of these other companies popping up, as you said, and it's just difficult. I know, obviously back in the day, everybody was looking at Boeing because of some of the projects going on there, and the aeronautics or aerospace industry made a lot of sense. At one point people were thinking, the rail yard thing. It's just interesting how it bounces around. Like there's some explanation in some places, and
Well, and so there was a DB Cooper, and I forget his real name, but he was called Saleshaw on the forums. And he worked at Boeing. He knew Sheridan Peterson. He was convinced Sheridan Peterson was Cooper. And he explained that at Boeing, in some of the areas, they would have basically dumpsters where they would throw electrical stuff into the dumpsters. Mm-hmm. And guys, these are engineers. They would go in there and like, well, look at this. They're throwing away this motherboard. I'm going to take this. I can still use, they were taking wire out of these dumpsters. And that would be a great explanation for why there's so much stuff on the tie, is that it was someone who was dumpster diving trying to get electronic equipment out of an industrial waste site. So, like I said, it's alluring, right? It's interesting. We want an answer. We want to figure, if we could just figure out where Cooper's from, we could maybe solve the case. And I don't know if we're going to get that. I think what we're going to get is what we already have, which is there's just too much stuff on it to pinpoint an area. I could be wrong. Tom can pull rabbits out of his hat, but the thing about Tom is he pulls a rabbit out of his hat and says, "Look at this! Look at what I found!" And then he murders the rabbit and throws it in the garbage and say, "Well, I guess we're going to try again." He has done that to me so many times.
That's science, I don't blame Tom. Just the findings take him in different directions. Yeah, which is super amazing. Yeah, Tom's a great guy. Definitely one of the highlights of CooperCon. If you guys can ever get there when they do it yearly, he does Tina Bar and then kind of his Thai stuff. It usually has some new stuff every year, so it's all super interesting. But yeah, the Thai particles are definitely a tough one because it seems to be that one thing. Of course, we didn't mention that at one point the FBI was wearing the tie to FBI parties, and so it hasn't been handled in the best of ways, unfortunately. So
and that ruins the DNA. I think if they're wearing it at a party, or if they have it at their desk or something, if it's in the mail, it's going to ruin the DNA. Where are they going to be? They're not going to put it into a manufacturing facility, right? They're not going to go to a machine shop where they're working with unalloyed titanium. They're not. There's places where the tie is not going to go.
Sure.
But you're right. You have to separate the contamination from the stuff that will actually help you, and that's extraordinarily difficult.
So when they were talking about the sulfur and the striking of matches, components or whatever remnants, did you pick anything up with that? Did that just kind of track with Cooper being a smoker, or did you think there was
it basically it's him being a smoker. There was a lot of particles dealing with that. I actually got to talk to Tom at 2021 con, and this was like a 20-minute conversation. We're sitting there talking about matches, and I guess Cooper probably used a Zippo lighter as well as matches. And he had a preference of matches. He preferred the paper matches, not the wood matches. And he preferred a certain type of flint that was that would have been a Zippo versus other types of lighters that you might see. So he had you can get these really alluring looks at Cooper's life that he may have been like super cheap and preferred these free paper book matches, but he also had a special lighter perhaps that he used. And then the problem is that those chemicals just interfere with the other chemicals that Tom found.
Right.
So it's just a layer upon layer. I have looked at, I don't have an electron microscope, but I do have a 2000 power microscope, and I have gone out and purchased ties. I have my father's ties. My father was a pilot in the Air Force and at UAL. I have my grandfather's ties. My grandfather was he was a teacher, but he also was a mechanic. He worked on trucks and cars and things. And I cannot find anything remotely like what Tom was talking about on the Cooper tie. The particle density is basically nothing compared to what this tie has. I've looked under these ties with a very powerful black light, and not seen at all the particles that are on the Cooper tie. The Cooper tie is very unique. And Tom has looked at ties from Boeing engineers and not found anything on them. So I think that is a big clue. And I think we could unravel it, but it may take a century and a supercomputer and AI to do it. And who knows if any of us will be around for that.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the AI stuff is interesting. And let me just interject that this is why I'm very low on the thrift store theory. That would be the greatest red herring ever if he randomly grabbed it at a thrift store and it just so happened to be from a foreign engineer that had all of those particles on it. You know what I mean? Of course, none of that would ever be traced back to him. So I just think that would be too lucky for Cooper to pull off. There's a solid 1% chance of it, right? But I think it's less than that. That tie had
a large hole in it, about a 1/8 inch hole, along with some pinholes, and it was only worth maybe $1 new. A thrift store would just throw that tie. They would have taken the tie tack or the mother of pearl thing and sold that, and the tie would have been thrown away because there's a giant hole in it. So maybe a garage sale, you can save it that way if you want to. Sure. But I think this was a single owner tie. Maybe it was D.B. Cooper's brother's tie, like you get from the Marla story. We don't know, but I think it was definitely close to him. Yeah, I think we can say that confidently, in fact.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, I was thinking one owner, but yeah, of course, there's always like the kind of family member scenario, which is interesting. Not much coming in on the tie. Oh, here we go. Can you ask Marty how that hole compared to his dad's tie tack?
Oh, no. Yeah, so I had my father, he had a tie, and Eric Eulis had a theory about the hole in Cooper's tie, and he said, well, it looks like a burn mark. And I looked at it and said, that doesn't look like a burn mark to me. And I picked up my dad's tie, and I thought, well, I'm going to take a look at it and see if I can't reproduce that mark with a cigarette burn or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I had to take off. My dad, he flew for United Airlines. He was a member of ALPA, which is the Airline Pilots Association. It's their union. And he had that tie pin, which is a very tiny, tiny pin. Yeah, it's not a burn hole, Nikki, for sure. But he had this little tiny pin that was ALPA that stayed on the tie for I think he flew for UAL for 14 years, and that tie was undisturbed after he retired for an additional 10 years before I looked at it. And when I removed that pin, there was a hole that exactly matched, both in size and in characteristic, the hole in Cooper's tie. So it is my belief that pinhole was something that was identifiable to Cooper. It was either it could have been a union pin, it could have been a company pin, it could have been a flag pin. I don't know what kind of tie tack it was, but it was something that you would keep on your tie all the time. And if you look at the back of a tie tack, there's like a sharp end, there's a little nub next to it to keep it from turning. And I think that's what created the mark in my dad's tie. So I think that's what that is. And boy, it would have been nice to have that, because it would have been nice to pinpoint him to something. But he removed it because obviously, if you're a member of like the auto workers union, you don't want the FBI to know that. You don't want law enforcement to know anything about you. You're going to remove that pin. So that's what I think it is. It's right where you'd expect a pin to be in relationship to the other marks on the tie. And it's just a huge clue that we can't even access, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's solid experimentation. I think you're right on that. And, of course, as we said, if it's identifiable in any way, an association or work related, obviously he takes it off before the jump, because if he does, God forbid, forget his tie, it's not going to lead direct, or, someone says, oh yeah, I remember that guy, he wore that pin in that same spot, every day to work, it's just an additional layer of identifiable factor. Chat's slowing down a little bit. Let's go on to suspects. I don't know where you're at these days. As I said, you listed, the majors and the minors in the book. I really like these kind of, disappeared missing people, the Dick Lepsey and the John List. I hadn't really heard much about them. Where are you at these days? Is there anybody that is kind of higher up on your radar? Have some lowered? How are you feeling about suspects these days? I try not to do suspects anymore, just because it makes people very unhappy with you. Sure.
And I used to confidently say, like, hey, this person is not DB Cooper, and this is why. And there's a lot of people that I really love now from the Cooper Vortex that have suspects, and I just don't talk about it. But let me say this: I'm gonna throw something at you. Imagine we had found Cooper's body, and he didn't have his wallet on him. I don't think that Cooper had his ID on him. We find his body, we still don't know who he is, right? Maybe someone can look at the corpse, which would be disgusting at that point, and say, "Oh, I recognize Uncle Phil." But no, I think that if we had found Cooper's body, he'd be what we call a John Doe, And there are approximately 10,000 John Does. This is research that I did 5 or 6 years ago to say, okay, if Cooper died, he's a John Doe, he's a John Doe missing person that we have a picture of. There's actually a lot of the it's almost sad too how awful these situations can be.
Sure,
but I don't think having Cooper's corpse would have helped us identify him necessarily. I think that he really was someone very disconnected from any kind of social network that would have helped to identify him, or else we'd know about him. So I think of him as a John Doe, and the male John Does from that era that were about Cooper's age have, certain characteristics. They tend to be loners, not have family, not be married, not have kids. A lot of substance abuse, which I don't think Cooper had. And that's how I really look at it at this point. There are some great suspects. I have to say, everyone loves Braden. I love Braden. I like Verdal. I think Verdal is an interesting suspect. Actually, I like a lot of those engineers. Like from Boeing. I like Sheridan Peterson as a suspect, quite frankly. So there's no suspect. I mean, there's a lot of suspects who are like that is not Cooper. Okay, Richard McCoy is not Cooper. Kenny Christensen is not Cooper. Walter Recca is not Cooper. Robert Rackstraw is not Cooper. We can say confidently they are not Cooper.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of interesting suspects in the Vortex. We're producing more of them every year, and I get exhausted by it in a lot of ways, because people used to contact me every week with a new suspect. Now it's maybe once or twice a year. I just can't take it. I mean, like I said, I've been at this for 11 years. I have a toddler. I'm exhausted. So I'm trying to be a good member of the Vortex and be helpful, but it's just something I don't want to delve into anymore. I'll talk about it. By the way, I'm not trying to get out of the interview. I'll talk about any suspect you want, but it's just I don't have a favorite anymore. I don't like to think in those terms.
Yeah, I agree. I totally relate 100%. I'm at the same way with Zodiac. The problem is with Zodiac, people throw guys that did crimes in Atlanta and New York that's nowhere near Northern California. And hey, Ross, let me tell you why my guy was there in 69. It just, none of it makes any sense. At least with Cooper, we have some kind of solids. We have the tie particles and, as you said, engineering backgrounds, the aerospace, etc., things that actually track and make somewhat sense. The only name that I really wrote down was Braden, just because I read Drew's book and that kind of got me hooked on the Vortex. Obviously, I love Braden's background. I know people have an issue with his height, which doesn't seem to track with the Cooper descriptions. But yeah, I mean, I as someone that we know could do it undeniably, certainly Braden we know could pull the jump, right? So,
no, for sure. But we can talk about Cooper in sense of a profile. And the most interesting thing that has happened recently has been the configuration of the aircraft. And we're going to get a little bit in the weeds here, if you let me.
Sure.
So Cooper asked for flaps at 15 degrees. And that's important to know, because not all aircraft have their flap settings in degrees. Sometimes they're in percent, like the DC-3, I believe, is in percent. He asked for 15 degrees flap. That is an indent setting on the commercial aviation 727. That's interesting that he knew that. He wanted the landing gear down. That didn't make sense for years. The landing gear down doesn't do anything other than increase drag, which doesn't mean it slows down the plane. It just means the plane burns more fuel to stay up in the air. Why would you have the landing gear down? That doesn't make sense. Well, apparently, and I have talked to Ryan Burns about this, and he's pretty confident, this was a configuration that Air America used. They had put the landing gear down to disrupt the airflow over the rear hatch, basically where the staircase is, to help objects and people get out of the aircraft without getting hit by that stream. Mm-hmm. Well, and they would use 15-degree flaps. Boeing did tests on this, and their test configuration had landing gear up and flaps at 30 degrees. So it wasn't a Boeing configuration. It was an Air America configuration specifically designed to help get stuff out of the back of the aircraft. Well, that's interesting. That is a big clue that Cooper may have been in Vietnam, or at least known someone in Vietnam who was working for Air America. That That helps out Braden. That helps out. The problem is that there are so many people who would have known about that through the grapevine. The soldiers talk to each other. There's big communities of them.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily help pinpoint us, but I think that's a big clue as to part of the profile of Cooper is that he was probably ex-military, and he may have been working in Air America or in Vietnam where he heard these stories and got that configuration, and that's huge. That is. I always thought that it was a mistake, that Cooper had a mistaken understanding of how an aircraft works. Mm-hmm. But no, in fact, it went the opposite way. Cooper had a better understanding of how the aircraft works. And that is, again, another alluring clue that we can't do anything with.
Sure. No, I like it a lot, though. I mean, at least it gives it a direction, where a lot of these things kind of pull up dead ends. And I guess we're going to continue on. No. I thought you might have added something more. Well, people like to say the line of Cooper is like, where did the knowledge go with those kind of settings, right? Because he asks her, he knows that it can be lowered, but he asks her how to lower it, right? So he doesn't know exactly where the switch is or what the component is. So it kind of adds an additional layer of complexity there.
Sure, and I don't know how helpful that is necessarily. Maybe that means that he wasn't on the aircraft when Air America was doing these things, but Air America also didn't have the stairs in those aircraft. They had a ramp. So I don't know. The system on the stairs is dumb proof. You open up the door and you see a sign and you pull a lever. Right. So he really didn't he could have figured it out himself. I don't think it's a red herring, though. I think he honestly wasn't quite sure, so he wanted to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess at that rate, you're getting to do the hop, so it's like you said, that's a pretty minor hiccup in dropping the stairs, and I obviously tying up the paracord in the open banks that he wanted the knapsacks, and he got the open bank bags or whatever they were. That obviously took a lot more time than doing this, right? So I guess at that point he probably had other motivations.
Well, and the aircraft is designed to escape from, so that the rear stairs are an emergency escape for the 727. There would have been information on there's like that safety placard in the pocket when you sit down. There's information on that, on how to open that door. So he would have figured it out. It would have been fine. Maybe he didn't have quite the level of confidence at that moment after everything else that had happened. He's been sitting around for hours. I don't know. That's an interesting little bit. I think we make too much of it.
Sure.
But it's a case that's this cold. You make a big thing about everything. Like I've had long conversations about the pen Cooper chose to write his ransom note with.
Yep. Sure. The matches. I've seen it all deep dived, and Nicky jumped in here. He also might have thought it could be lowered from the cockpit. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
And he was definitely wrong on
that. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the whole Norjack thing is super interesting. Just from him going to the gate, we could kind of track Cooper's movements a little bit there to getting on the flight. One thing that drives me crazy is when people say that like he's pretending to be a regular smoker. I think that would be a super unnecessary risk for someone that's about to go do this jump. Like you're gonna risk messing up your breathing or having a coughing fit on the way down. And maybe that affects you trying to pull. Like I'm kind of reaching there, but
how many drinks did Cooper have?
He spilled the first one, and doesn't order an additional bourbon, if I'm correct. So
I don't. Maybe one or two.
Yeah.
He's not drinking at 5 o'clock. He's not drinking at 6 o'clock. He's not drinking before takeoff out of Seattle. He's had 7 smokes. He has smoked with. Even if you hotbox a cigarette, you're going to get thirsty. This is an individual who didn't need anything to drink. He didn't. He was able to smoke the cigarettes and look natural doing it. He was a smoker. Like most of the guys smoked. He was a smoker. There's no reason he didn't fake it. I invite people to smoke and not have a drink. Like I used to be a smoker, and when I was smoking, I would get thirsty after a pack of cigarettes. So I just don't believe it.
Yeah, same. I just think it's making more of like, there's already enough mystery there that he doesn't. At that point, I think he's pretty confident that he's going to make it to dropping the stairs and most likely getting the money out the door. So it's like I think it's adding a little bit too much extra on that he needs to smoke 8 cigarettes at that point to keep up the charade.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting, and of course, he does. I mean, I guess we could go to the evidence. He obviously is conscientious enough to get his note, his hijacking instructions or the notes or whatever returned to him. So he seemingly holds on to everything he feels like he needs to hold on to. Obviously, we had the tie discussion earlier, so he forgets the tie. I pretty much ask this to every Cooperite that I talk to. What's your grasp of the tie? I know it's low light. The tie is maybe a similar color to the seat that it's on. Do you think he forgot that, or did he not care at that point? What's your grasp of that?
You put on a parachute, you're going to remove the tie. So you put on the parachute, you have the harness, it connects across the chest strap. You're going to connect that, and you're going to realize that you don't want this thing flapping in your face. You don't want it. You're just going to remove it. And the natural thing for any guy to do is you remove the tie, you just throw it wherever next, like on your seat, on a bed, whatever. That's just what Cooper did. The tie was in the way. He's not worried about fingerprints. The technology for pulling fingerprints off of fabric is, I think, not available at this time in 1971. He was worried about fingerprints. We know this because anything that could have had fingerprints on it, he either wiped down or he had something to obscure his fingerprints. They didn't get good fingerprints from anywhere. This was how they solved crimes back then. The fingerprints were the DNA of the day.
Sure.
And he didn't care about the tie. He cared about things that could have had fingerprints or could have been linked to him, like his handwriting on the note. So I think he's making reasonable. He has reasonable caution on things that he understands that police can do. He's not worried about things police can do in the future, like DNA, because he's
Sure.
not a futurist. Like he's a normal guy. He's a normal guy who's committing a crime that he has thought about, and he has a certain amount of knowledge, but he's not worried about certain things. He's definitely not worried about his tie. He's just going to toss it. It's in the way. It's in the way. It's got to go. He's not going to put it in his pocket. He's getting out of the aircraft. He's got money. He's got what he wants.
Yeah. I'm right along the lines of that. Bring Nikki back in the fold here. Is there any evidence of a certain pen being used for the ransom note? Never heard that before.
So that was in the FBI files that Cooper used a felt tip pen, which was relatively new at the time. I can't remember when this was circulating. I think it was whatever FBI file that was in. And because you talk about everything, you overthink everything in this case. Oh, yeah. Like, did that say anything about Cooper? And from what I remember, the felt tip pens were popular among drafters at the time. That doesn't match anything on the tie. No. A certain graphic artist preferred them. People who made illustrations for magazines, or even I believe that comic books came up too as being a felt tip pen thing. But the problem was anyone could buy them. So it wasn't like it was specialized to an industry. Anyone could buy them. The fact that graphic artists preferred them doesn't really help us, and it doesn't match any other evidence. But yeah, that is how granular you can get with this case, is you can look at everything. But yeah, it was a felt tip pen. It was on a legal pad of blank paper. The note was. That was a description of it. He could have gotten that pad of paper from the hotel that he stayed at. We don't know, but it is so mundane, and it seems informative. And then you look at it and like, it can't be that informative. My grandfather had felt tip pen ties, and he was a teacher. So yeah, we've looked at everything.
Yeah, for sure. You guys have. Nikki followed up with, would a regular Joe have one of those lying around, or who would buy one just to write the ransom, kind of preparing the pen? Maybe make it look another way.
I bet you it was a pen that he preferred. Everyone, people don't write a lot now, but you go back, 50, 60 years, people had preferences for pens. So I would imagine that this is just a pen that he had, that these were the things that he used. He wasn't a ballpoint pen guy. He wasn't a fountain pen guy. He was a felt tip pen guy. Or maybe he was a grease pen guy who didn't want to use a grease pen. I don't know. But yeah, I think it was a preference. I think that was another characteristic of Cooper that doesn't help us in the case. Not right now, anyway.
Sure. Nicole Legg, do you think he used the tie to wipe fingerprints? In doing that, do you think that contributed to more random particles?
I don't. There were no reports of him wiping the glass that he used for the drink, right? And he's being looked at by Tina. Jesus Christ. You know, Tina's right there. Oh, may have okay, he tried to wipe the fingerprints off of the glass thing. Okay, that would have been in the FBI files. I don't think he was worried about it. I think that he either had very dry skin, that didn't leave fingerprints, and he knew that, or he obscured it some way with super glue or something like that. That was popular at the time. I think that's something that Ryan has found out.
Yeah, that's
whatever it was.
Zodiac
he wasn't worried about the glass.
Cement. Zodiac claimed to use airplane cement, which who knows?
Yeah, any kind of glue would have been just fine, or he could sandpaper off. My fingerprints are really clear. I've looked at them under a microscope because I've gotten that bored. But I know, like, my father's fingerprints are not like that at all. He doesn't leave fingerprints. His hands are very dry. So I don't know. Whatever it was, if he was worried about fingerprints, he would have wiped down that glass. He would have wiped down, and people would have seen it. Tina would have seen him do that, and that would have been reported to him that he was concerned about that. So no, I don't think that he used the tie to wipe anything down. And again, I don't think there's not red phosphors and uranium and things in the aircraft that are going to get on the tie from that.
Right.
Again, the tie is contaminated, no doubt, but the particles we care about are not going to be from that contamination.
For sure. Well, I like how you mentioned the comic book artist there. I've got one of these, which I was a big fan of that angle for some time. Of course, it tracks with the French-Belgian connection. Beeson did a great job with Paratrooper of Fortune with chronicling some of that stuff. But I also like the comic connection because it's prevalent in Zodiac, so it'd make a lot of sense if it tracked there. But I really like what Burns found, which was that American comic strip about the Dan Cooper pilot. So obviously it's we've all been through the many Dan Cooper names, and this is the common one that came up a long time ago. But it's obviously a name that's been used multiple times, so it's difficult to pin it down to any one thing.
And I love what Ryan did with that, and I don't want to speak ill of it, so I'm not going to. I think that fits with the Verdal theory. But one of the things that I have found recently is I've been looking at World War II. Basically caricature comics, I'm not sure what to call them, from Bill Maudlin, who won a Pulitzer Prize during World War II for making these drawings for Stars and Stripes and other newspapers, showing common life among soldiers in World War II in Europe. He's very famous if you look him up. And in his comics, and he did thousands of them, there are soldiers reading comic books in the background of I found at least 2 in the last couple of weeks, which means that these are things that soldiers would have done, would have read comic books. And I've always felt that a comic book in a foreign language is a great way to learn some of the conversational aspects of that language. Sure. Certainly how to read. I did take in order to read the Dan Cooper comic that I bought, I had to take some French lessons. I was listening to French on tape as I was walking my dog. I did a little bit of work to be able to read the Dan Cooper comic, and I do not have any conversational skills in French at all, but I do feel confident reading French much more than I did, obviously, when I hadn't done that. So sure. I think that that's something that is a possibility. Again, how likely is it? Is it a 5% possibility? Is it a 1%? Is it 50%? I don't know. But it's not something that we can ignore. I think it's definitely a possible part of the history of Dan Cooper. Yeah,
absolutely. And then, of course, we'd be remiss to mention that, of course, the name Dan Cooper isn't really used much outside the Vortex because the AP sent it out as DB Cooper, and it basically sticks to this day. The big headline is we all kind of call the case DB Cooper, right? Even though we know that the name he used was Dan Cooper, which is super interesting. We have a question for Marty. Does his choice of Raleigh cigarettes suggest anything about his class background or regional origin based on known preferences among smokers at the time? It's a good question.
You are getting some very smart questions. These people are smarter than I am. So yes, I do. We actually found I don't remember who it was. It was on another one of these forums. I think it may have been Shutter's forum. I forget who found it. Whoever it was, I want to give them due credit, but they found a copy of the Raleigh cigarettes customer profile. They profiled the target customer for their coupon cigarettes, which is what the Raleighs were. Mm-hmm. And it is a lower class individual. It's someone who is not middle class, so someone who is a working man, blue collar. The coupon's a thrifter. I don't remember all the specifics of it, but it is it certainly does suggest, again, another part of the profile for Cooper. And it's one of a blue collar worker, which sometimes comes up or sometimes doesn't, because other aspects of Cooper's actions and habits seem to show that he was middle class, upper class, possibly educated, beyond, definitely educated beyond high school. Mm-hmm. So he is someone almost someone between two worlds, someone who is a manager or who has to wear a tie to work, but he's working in an industrial, dirty, disgusting setting. He smokes a poor man's cigarette with coupons, so he's probably thrifty. He wears the same tie for 7 years, but he is also intelligent enough to possibly to acquire all this aviation knowledge, which is not simple. It requires reading. It requires forethought. Requires a certain, we could call it IQ, to do. And Cooper is walking this line between being a kind of a lower class thug and a white collar thief. And it's fascinating, and it's frustrating as all get out, because you want to pin this guy down and he refuses to be pinned down to anything.
100%. No, I love the point you guys made there. Seems everybody in the chat's on the same line. Good way of putting in between two worlds, even thinking of, my family's from New England. So, there's, what it strikes me as, you could be raised blue collar, as you said, go to college, become a manager in your profession and get a higher echelon of income. But if you were raised with kind of those more humble blue collar roots, you could still have a preference for lower quality Raleigh cigarettes. And even though maybe you're a mid-level manager or a high-level manager, right? Bill Mitchell, I think, said that he got like an executive. They thought he was like an airline executive or whatever. They got that kind of and again, difficult to get that interpretation from a guy sitting a few rows back that you only get glimpses of. But as you said, it's all kind of goes different directions, which is super interesting.
Yeah, and Mitchell got a good look. Mitchell was right across the aisle from him, so Mitchell got a good look at him.
For sure. Yeah, and I like the stuff that we get from Mitchell. Just checking. Which inspiration were you talking about, Nikki? Were you talking about the French comic or the American one? I'm not sure what he was referring to there, but based off what we just went there, I think we could kind of go more into a little bit more of a profile discussion, which is I've seen people dig in super deep that he's a hardened criminal to the point that they're angry at him and angry about the Norjack crime. He threatened the staff with a bomb and such, and he's this horrible person. I'd like to get your take on, Cooper as a repeat offender, because quite frankly, I think something that would help a DB Cooper, a Dan Cooper, or a Zodiac is the fact that they don't have any criminal history. You know what I mean? It'd make them much more difficult to track. So that's kind of the direction I tend to lean, but where are you at on that?
So I'm not a big fan of Dan Cooper anymore. I think that he did something stupid and he got other people killed who tried to copycat him. And he did threaten to blow the plane up. He did threaten a woman's life. He did threaten suicide. They're not going to take me alive.
True.
He was doing something incredibly dangerous, and he was a criminal. He was doing something wrong. He had this in mind. This was something he was comfortable with. He was not nervous like McCoy was. He was he was also not brash and confident like McNally was. So once again, he's on that fine line where he's very calm doing this criminal activity. He's very calm with the idea of jumping out of an aircraft. He's very calm the entire time, doesn't get frustrated for the most part, except in parts where he knows, like, it doesn't take this long to fuel the aircraft.
Sure.
So as far as the criminality aspect of it, he had to have been comfortable with it. I think if he had been like a common thug, it would not have gone the way that it did. I think you're right. If he was a career criminal, he would have been caught either later or they would have identified him from before. Like, okay, we have this guy who's doing stupid stuff, robbing banks and things like that. It looks like the sketch matches. They would have, after 50 years, we would have made that connection.
Sure.
So I don't think he was a career criminal. I don't think he did a lot of criminal acts, but I think that, and this might be the Braden aspect talking, I think he was very comfortable being a criminal in the same way that what soldiers do is kind of criminal. When soldiers kill people and break things. A person that I like to think about is Richard Marcinko, who recently passed away. He was the SEAL Team 6 commander. Yep. He actually went to jail because he was breaking into nuclear facilities and kidnapping base commanders. He said that he had orders to do it and to test the security, and they put him in jail for it. He was an absolute thug. You can read his books. He doesn't hide it. He was a good thug in that he believed in the American way, and he was trying to hurt people who were trying to hurt us. But I think that there has to be some kind of military background here. If he wasn't a career criminal, but he felt comfortable with bombs and threatening people and getting money and jumping out of an aircraft, the place where you get non-criminal criminal activity is in the military. So I passionately believe that the most important aspect of a Cooper profile is that military background, and that's with all due respect to the Vordal people. I think Milton Vordal is a possibility just because I think Vordal was a sociopath who lacked empathy for others, which is an important part of a criminal profile. Sure. So I'm not trying to take away from any. Again, I don't like talking about suspects. I don't want to debunk suspects anymore. I'm done with that. But in my mind, that military background or like a military connection of some kind is important in the Cooper profile.
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely nailed that. I mean, Nikki knows I'm a big fan of his Vordal research. I love your point with Marcinko there. Rest in peace to Richard Marcinko. I read, I think, almost all of his books. The first one is Rogue Warrior, which is the autobiography. But yeah, that's when I interviewed Beeson, he was really putting me onto the Mac v. SOGs. And, it sounded like a lot of those kind of black ops that Marcinko and the Navy SEALs were doing during Vietnam. Obviously, the way Marcinko used to operate was unless otherwise directed. So he would just send out what his mission was, then turn off his radio and go out to the field and be like, well, I mean, you guys didn't direct me a different, you know what I mean? So amazing stuff there. Everybody should go check out Marcinko as well.
Anyone who gets a chance, they should read the original Rogue Warrior. It is a remarkable book. It is definitely, it's one I don't think is talked about, but if you were into this sort of thing, read that book. He talks about parachuting in it too, because he was there was one story in there where he pulled the ripcord, or he pulled less than 1,000 feet above the deck.
Yep.
on a free fall, like insane. He did insane things, and I think those are the same things that Ted Braden would be doing.
Yeah. The great parallel between Braden's Mac v. SOG background is obviously Marcinko's SEAL career, and just not enough things to go over, but Rogue Warrior, I think it's probably the best autobiography I've ever read. Basic underwater drill school, Hell Week. You're going to learn in-depth stuff on the Navy SEAL training there. 1 second on my throat, Marty. I'm having some allergies this week.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll survive. Nicole Legg, do you think you had an accomplice? Yeah, I had a question about Skyjack for this coming up for you.
I didn't until last week. I think that Joe Johnstone, that is fascinating. I think that is possible. I never believed that Cooper could have had an accomplice because he didn't know where he was jumping within 20 miles. Like he would have known, maybe would have known that he was near Portland. Possibly. I'd never thought much about it because I thought that he was, as Ryan says, just winging the landing zone. So how is he going to talk to an accomplice? But if the accomplice is a drunk and you are an intelligent but not perfect hijacker who is putting too much confidence in your ability to find a phone, well, maybe. I think it's a possibility. I think it's something to look at. But now that it's come out, there's so little information on Johnstone. It is remarkable that you could find another clue, and then you dig in a little bit and realize, oh, it's already a dead end. It's been a couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to go into Skyjack. Man, I forgot the character's name, but who Gray supposedly interviews, and the guy tells him that he's part of the ground extraction team. Like, as much as I love the theory that Braden does it with his old spec op crew and has guys ready for him on the ground, I think that would be the most theatrical, kind of outcome, and it'd probably make the best movie. But at the same time, we would all admit to ourselves as a criminal crime to keep it unsolved. Every person you added would be a layer that could tell on you and a risk you'd be taking. No matter how, if you trusted them from NOM or your old unit or whatever, it's still kind of unnecessary risk, I would say. What's your take on that Skyjack theory?
Well, and McNally got caught because his accomplice told on him, and his accomplice didn't do anything. His accomplice didn't help him on the ground at all. So he didn't even need the accomplice, quite frankly. Maybe McNally would have gotten away without an accomplice. Every individual increases the chance that you're going to get caught. Every member of the team increases the chance that you get caught. But there are examples of teams of people who are committing large crimes that got away with it somehow. So it's not outside the realm of possibility like everything else. Having traveled now in that area, again, at CooperCon 2021, it is not an easy place to navigate, and perhaps a trained soldier would be more confident in their ability to get to get an extraction team to them. But there's no straight lines in that area. It's very hilly and mountainous, and I would find it very difficult to try to get somebody to me, even if I had a radio. I don't know, and maybe the radio experts, Mark Meltzer or 377, he maybe would be able to explain how to triangulate even in rough terrain. I'm not that guy. I like it. I mean, I want it to be true, because if there was an accomplice, that is another avenue that maybe we get more information from an accomplice when they pass away, or when their sons or daughters pass away, or something that might help solve the case. I don't think it's likely, but it's more possible. It's more possible now, again, with the recent revelations about Johnstone, than it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nikki and Nicole helped me out. It was Jake, was what Greg called him in there. I guess, is this what you're referring to?
I barely remember that. I haven't read Skyjack in 11 years, I think. When it first came out is when I read it.
It struck out to me because I was on it super late after, like, during pandemic, I basically went through the backlog of Schaefer's vortexes and kind of reverse engineered all the knowledge. And then so I went and read that late. And then I was like, this part is awesome. I mean, I don't know how factual or accurate any of it is, but I was like, this, like I was saying about the whole Braden type, extraction team, or a Braden archetype or whatever. And I think, was that what you were referencing? Nikki said the last possible accomplice Ryan profiled in his last video. I didn't catch that one, so I'm not sure what he was.
Yeah, that was that latest possibility that Ryan found. That's Cooper suspect number one. The other thing about the accomplice is, I guess, especially from the story from Skyjack, I'm trying to remember. I think that was linked to Joe. Was that linked to Joe Weber? I guess I'm asking Nikki.
Yeah, I think there was
contacted
some of that there, because there was obviously the jump and the guy, is that the cowboy thing, the guy in the rain and the whole cowboy thing, I believe, relates to that stuff.
It's that episode. I'll have to look into Skyjack now again, but it sounds a lot like what was in the Caulfield grift, the Jack Caulfield, and in the Las Vegas in the mid 1970s, is that there was claims about having help on the ground that just didn't make sense. So I wonder if that's where it came from. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I couldn't tell you either. And then obviously, it's been similar things have been floated for McCoy. I know Smith has the reference of the small plane sighting, and I know that's gone in circles as well. But I always really like that. In my extremely primitive, limited case knowledge, I was hoping that the bomb was the road flares, and he could signal the small plane, maybe use some radar, walkie-talkies or radios, as you said. And I'm sure Meltzer knows much more about it than I do, but that was as far as I got with fleshing that one out, which you can see isn't very far. But as you said, it's the vortex.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this: I have read approximately 40,000 pages of FBI documents, and you can add in the books too, which are not nearly as voluminous. And I feel like I know less than you do about this case, quite frankly. It's just too much. It's a wave. It's it's an elephant that you eat one bite at a time, and then another elephant shows up.
100%. Great.
Every month it shows up.
Yeah, thank God for Ryan being able to go through that stuff, because I certainly would be unable to do so. I mean, shout out to Colbert for getting the FOIA and getting the documents dropped. I think that what he did with the rack straw theory and pointing the finger at the Ingrams was absolutely preposterous. So I certainly don't agree with that. But it's nice that he got the document dump, which is something we certainly haven't gotten from Zodiac, and I don't think we will, with it being a cold case. Here's Nikki saying the same thing as you. The more I learn, the less I know.
Yes.
Genius metaphor for the vortex, of course. But yeah, guys, I was super pumped to get Marty on here. That's the book. Definitely go get it. Finding G.P. Cooper, Martin Andrade Sr. Any other final questions with Marty before we let him go? My voice is just super shredded today. Today, guys, I've had the allergies all week, so it's just been killing me. You know how this season goes.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible.
It's the worst. It's definitely gotten better since I moved out of New England, but I still get hit up in that first. Here we go. Maybe this will be one last one for you. If Cooper profile indicates both blue collar and technical education, giving him expertise about aviation, might this point towards a degree from vocational college, maybe on GI Bill after service? I like where that's going.
Yeah. So the original FBI file said that they thought that Cooper had some college education based on the way he acted and his vocabulary. I have no reason to doubt that, and I think that maybe vocational training. I don't think vocational training would get you there necessarily. The other thing to note is that Cooper didn't swear, and if you read about McNally's hijacking or even McCoy, if soldiers generally, criminals generally, they swear a lot. I don't know if you've ever been on a construction site with a bunch of carpenters. They swear a lot, and I think the fact that Cooper didn't swear is indicative of the FBI thought a religious background, and I think that it might be a sociocultural thing. It might be that he grew up in an environment where he didn't swear, and that he worked in an environment where he didn't swear. Maybe the guys around him did, but he was in charge. He didn't swear, and that was part of his profile. It was part of the way that he chose to live his life. And it's the reason I talk about it is because it speaks to me, because I work, I worked in construction. I work in the lumber industry, and everyone I know swears, and I do not swear, and not for religious purposes. I am educated. I have a college degree, but I think that it carries more weight. Now I do swear. Don't, Ryan, if you're typing something, you can stop, because I swear at Ryan all the time. Nikki too. But I try not to do it in my professional life and in my social life, other than among other guys. So I think that's really indicative. He's committing a crime. He's threatening people with a bomb. He's threatening to kill this young woman, and he's not using the F word. He's not saying, "Damn it, get the F this, F that." Well, that's that's another clue as to his background. Again, it could be religious, it could be socioeconomic. You might have been, upper middle class or whatever. I don't know, but it's a clue that you should look at, and it points away from, a construction worker, a cement guy, someone like that, or like a common criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I liked about the Braden temperament, the respecting women, and at least what little we know about Braden, right? Because there isn't really that much out there about him. With McCoy and this whole Grider thing, right? No one at any point ever says a Southern accent, which didn't McCoy mostly definitely have a Southern accent, didn't have the skin underneath his tongue. So they never say speech impediment, those are the major things. That's just obvious with a Richard McCoy. So at Rackstraw, nothing about that guy says respecting women. He's also 27 at the time of Norjack. You know what I mean? So just some blatant pitfalls, like you said, with some of those mainstream, suspects. And, we got to sit through the kind of insufferable documentaries that keep popping up on them.
Yeah.
We have to collect all the tea leaves. Good job highlighting some on this show, gents. Really appreciate you, Nikki. You're the man. Nikki's my, if I need a lifeline on Cooper, that's my guy. But
Nikki does great work.
Yeah, he's awesome. I love his Vordell stuff, and he's always putting me on. Ghost of Elsinore. That's all Nikki. So great show. Really appreciate you, Marty. If there's any final questions for Marty before we let him go, I know we just said that once, but we'll give you guys one more try. Or anything else you want to hit on before you?
You can always contact me at Twitter if you can spell my last name. I'm also on the Facebook group, and I answer questions anytime, except when I'm sleeping. So.
Yeah, I've seen some of your political commentary on the X platform. Absolutely love it. Marty's one of my favorite follows. Definitely, I'm going to put your link in the description so they can follow you, dude. It's amazing. Go get the book on Amazon. And is that the best place? Anywhere else they should find your stuff?
Yep. No, Amazon. Get it from Amazon.
Awesome. All right, really appreciate you coming on, Marty. Maybe if there's ever a development, we'll check in with you again if it makes it in our lifetime with the 71-year-old case.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Marty. I'm just going to talk to the chat for a bit and do an outro, but really appreciate your time, man, and come back soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, man. Get the book, guys. It's out there on Amazon. Finding DB Cooper. Really awesome snapshot of the case. Like we said, he does major, minor suspects. A lot of good research on the World War II jumps. Appreciate everybody who came through. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Nicole. Not too much other channel news coming up soon, guys. We got another movie review next weekend. And then I'll get some of the Zodiac shows going and stuff like that. But definitely appreciate everyone who came through. Go subscribe to Nikki, Finding DB Cooper on YouTube. And all the usual spots. There's a couple good books on a couple good groups on Facebook. Definitely check those out. The DB Cooper Mystery Group. And I think the other one's called the Official DB Cooper Group. I know there's another one where they do kind of some Tina Bar and some Braden stuff. Doubleheader today. I think Drew Beeson has Bruce Smith on talking about Bruce's new book. I'm not sure what that is, but obviously Bruce has DB Cooper in the FBI, the Cooper Bible. So definitely check that out. And go check out those other books. Of course, there's a few decent documentaries on Cooper as well. So check those out as well, guys. I'm not sure who we're going to bring up next on the Cooper series. We'll have to go back to the drawing board and see who's out there. We'd love to get Tom Kay. We'd love to get Bruce Smith. So I think I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. If you guys have any last minute questions for me. Again, the Zodiac shows are in the works. Episode 5 of the main series, definitely going down this summer. You can check me on Zodiac Speaking with Morph and Rich wasn't on that one, but definitely shout out to them. They're on all the other episodes. And then I was on the last panel with Mysteries with Mr. Belgique over on Jerome's channel. So appreciate it, brother. Thanks for coming through. I'll give you guys one more minute. Any final questions for me? But definitely below in the description, Marty's book link. Follow him on X. His WordPress. Definitely check out his blog there. That's where you can get him. And of course, in the meantime, for me, like, sub, share. Click join to get a membership next to the subscribe button. And you can check me out on Patreon, where I do some of my deep dives. I have some new stuff coming soon over there. You can subscribe free with the Gmail. And with that, Probably going to dip in a couple seconds here, guys, just because, like I said, the voice has been thrashed this week. Hoping to be rested up and good to go for next weekend. And I'm moving, but we're going to try to do the show next weekend anyway. Invasion USA, Chuck Norris, going to be a classic. So I think that will do it for Cooper Chronicles Volume 7. Marty Andrade, definitely a legend in the space, and it was a super awesome conversation. Definitely put us on to some good info, and that was good stuff. I hope you guys like the show. Like, sub, share, and we're both on X, me and Marty, so you guys can hit us up on there. So that's going to do it for me, guys. Like, sub, share. Appreciate you guys coming through. Bye.